Alrighty, welcome in everyone to just another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, October 27th, a little bit late on the reaction show. Apologies for that, but I'm pretty glad we waited because we had a huge piece of news drop down the last 24 hours. Brian Kelly has been fired from LSU. We will jump into that to start off the show, and then we'll get into the big games. We'll get into why Brian Kelly was fired, at least part of the reason he was fired. LSU gets rolled by A&M 49-25. We'll get into Vanderbilt, Missouri, Ole Miss, and Oklahoma. Then we'll take a little bit of a break. We'll get back to weird upsets and close calls. We'll get to the crazy comeback from Texas over Mississippi State, Alabama surviving in Columbia, a couple other ones there, and then we have a little bit of a roundup on all the other games that happened. Memphis gets a huge win over South Florida, and a couple other games that I want to get to before we get out of here. But let's go ahead and jump into this thing. Brian Kelly has been fired from LSU. This is a move that I think a lot of people were whispering about from the start of the season really on. And now it's finally happened, and it's a very kind of weird feeling because I think a lot of people look at the raw numbers, the way that they did with James Franklin, and they're thinking they were playing pretty good football. They were winning a lot of football games. They were, I believe, had won the most since he had taken over in the SEC. Problem is they didn't win the ones that mattered, and frankly, the bigger problem was the dude never embraced what the LSU job is about. And what the LSU job is about is Louisiana. It's about buying into what that culture is, buying into what those people are, and buying into recruiting there. And it never felt like he did that. There was something that a lot of people have said over the last 24 hours that I really do mirror in a lot of ways. On the sideline, in the A&M game, it never felt like that guy was coaching. It always felt like he was yelling at someone. He was telling someone to do their job better without actually trying to give them ways to do their job better. It never felt like he was the full-time, no-holds-barred head coach of the LSU Tigers. It felt like a status symbol to me. It felt like a guy that was at a place where, yes, you can do incredible things, you can win a national title, but certain things were getting in his way. And he saw a little bit better of a job, a much better way to recruit kids within that state and not have the overarching, Notre Dame academic part of it, the just overall Notre Dame part of it that does hurt recruiting in some respects. He saw a chance to go to a bigger place with a bigger paycheck, with bigger stature, and he took it. And it never felt like it fit. Now, I'll be the first to say, when he got hired, I thought it was going to work. I thought he was too good of a head coach, a guy that had won a number of games, was the winningest head coach in college football to that very moment, and he went to a place where, I don't want to say it's easy to win, but you're set up very well to win at LSU in just about every single case, and he never quite got there. He made bad hires. The hires that he did make that ended up working out, he made way too late on in the process. He alienated the fan base that if you alienate, they're going to turn on you very quickly. Just never played this correctly. And it's a job that is so, so incredible, and we'll jump into that here in a second, but Brian Kelly never felt like the head coach of the LSU Tigers. He felt like a guy that wanted a little bit bigger of a status, wanted to be in the SEC, wanted to puff his chest out a little bit more and say he was the head coach of the LSU Tigers, but it never felt like he took that job as seriously as you should and as seriously as I have to imagine the next guy will. So I'd love to sit here and say that I'm upset that Brian Kelly was fired. I'd love to sit here and say that, he should be hired somewhere here pretty soon. I don't think he should. And it's not necessarily a personal thing against Brian Kelly. I got plenty of that stuff, but I'll leave that to the side for the time being. This doesn't seem like a guy that is going to be very good at head coaching moving forward. It doesn't seem like a guy that cares much to coach going forward. I think he cares about being a CEO and being a status symbol. I don't think that wins you football games. So I think LSU made the right decision here. Obviously, it's going to be quite a bit of money. It sounds like the payout might be a little bit easier on LSU. It sounds like they're negotiating that right now. Could drop it down even by half, which would be massive, from $56 million down to $28-25. That would be huge for LSU moving forward. And then obviously, you got to talk about the next step. Who do you hire in this role? It's the name that everyone's talking about. Lane Kiffin is obviously going to be at the very top of this list. I think Florida probably got very mad when this job came open because I think Lane Kiffin would I think he would leave for LSU before he would leave for Florida, I guess is the best way to put it. I don't know that he would leave for LSU. That's obviously up for debate. We will see how it plays out over the next 4, 5, 6 weeks, and we'll see what happens at the end of this. The reality is, this is the best job on the market. Period. End of story. Frankly, I think people down in Tallahassee are figuring out that they might have to stick with Norvell for one more year, because the reality is you don't want to get in this competition. Because LSU wins, that's where everything starts. Then it goes to Florida and Penn State. Then it would go down to Florida State, maybe in Auburn if they end up firing Hugh Freeze. There is a lot that is going to happen. All of it's going to happen from a trickle down from LSU. And frankly, I think there's a couple of names here. I think Lane Kiffin, if you can get him, fantastic. That would be a great head coach for you. I think Marcus Freeman is someone you have to call. Obviously, you went to Notre Dame the last time around. I think that guy would do the things that Brian Kelly was obviously not willing to do at LSU. I think he would be bought in from the fan base immediately. I think that is a special head coach that is just waiting to get a national title. I think he could do it at Notre Dame. I think he could very well do it at LSU too. So that's another name to watch. Brent Key is a name to watch as well. John Summerall. I think he would be incredible and immediately get the fan base to buy into him. There's a lot of good names out there. The reality is they're going to have the first pick, and then everyone else is going to have to work downstream from them. But the thing I kind of circled in the reality of the LSU job, to me, there are 5 names that wouldn't listen. And really, you could argue 4, and we'll talk about that in a second, but Kirby Smart is not going to listen. He's not leaving Georgia. Ryan Day is not leaving Ohio State. I don't think Kalen DeBoer is leaving Alabama. I don't think Steve Sarkisian's leaving Texas. We'll talk about that story about him going to the NFL. I think if he were to leave Texas, that's how it would happen, but he's not leaving Texas for LSU. And then Dan Lanning, I think, is up in the air. I don't think he would leave Oregon for LSU, but he is an SEC guy. It would be a little bit easier of a recruiting footprint. That is something to watch. That is definitely a name that I think they're at the very least going to call. So we'll see what happens there. It's unsure what happens the rest of the season. Frank Wilson, the running back coach, is taking over as the interim coach. That dude loves LSU. If there's anyone in that building that loves LSU, it's him, and that is a very talented team that gets a bye week and then goes into an Alabama game where, yeah, you don't have too much to play for in terms of the playoff. You got plenty of pride to play for. So I do think this is still a very dangerous team going the rest of the season, but another lost season in a number of lost seasons under Brian Kelly. Felt like it started from the jump with Jaden Daniels and Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. That team should have made the playoff, and he found a way to make them not. It's officially over, LSU fans, and I think everyone is very excited about that. We'll see what happens with Brian Kelly going forward. I have to imagine we won't see him in college football here pretty soon, and we'll see what happens from there. LSU, you got your pick of the litter, at least as of right now. We'll see where they end up going. I think it's going to be Lane Kiffin and then everyone else. We'll find out the rest of the way. But something that spurred this on was A&M coming into their house and bludgeoning them for 4 quarters, and that entire stadium just clearing out. The second that stadium clears out at night, you've lost your job. That's my new theory around LSU. If you have Baton Rouge at night clearing entirely out before the 4th quarter, you've officially lost your job because you've lost the fan base. And I've said this time and again, you are as good as your buy-in from your fan base and your boosters. That's the reality of current college football. He had lost just about every single fan and booster you could possibly think of. But let's focus on A&M because they won the football game. They're the number 3 team in the country. This is a really good football team. And it's a football team that is well coached, that has athletes all over the place with Kevin Concepcion obviously taking back the kick. You have Marcel Reed, just a freak of nature and slowly finding it in the pass game. Obviously, a couple of interceptions in this game, still working out some kinks in the passing game, but when you're that dangerous with your legs, you're going to have openings in the pass game that are a little bit easier to hit than some other guys. Went for over 300 total yards, 4 touchdowns. They rushed for 224 in this game, did A&M. They were great on 3rd down. This guy is special leading the way. He's going to be in the Heisman conversation pretty much throughout the rest of the year. This team isn't going to fall on its face. I think a lot of people, kind of including myself in some respects, were kind of waiting for it. It's happened a number of years in the past for A&M. It happened last year. They were 7-1, finish 8-4, and miss out on everything in front of them. But the reality is, Mike Elko fundamentally changes what Texas A&M is going forward. And it's not necessarily they're bigger, they're tougher, they're stronger now. they're mentally tougher. I can tell you that. They're absolutely a team that you do not want to face in these tough games down the stretch because they will bludgeon you to death. They have won games different ways. They have won a shootout up in South Bend. They won a rock fight against Auburn. They blew out a team in Baton Rouge that does not get blown out in Baton Rouge no matter how bad those LSU teams are. A&M's a really good football team. There's really not much more to be said. We'll see what happens the rest of the season. They have a lot still to play for, and they got some big-time games coming up. Missouri this upcoming weekend, or I believe they do have a bye before Missouri, if I'm not mistaken. But Missouri coming up, Texas at the end of the year. They could not make the SEC championship, although I expect them to, but they're absolutely going to be in the conversation deep in this season, and I expect them to see them in the playoff. Very well could win the national title with the way they're playing right now. Missouri falls on the road to Vanderbilt. This Vanderbilt team is so impressive to me because they don't have to be impressive. One of the big-time things that happened with college football teams that are kind of ascending throughout a couple of years, let's say with Vanderbilt in this example, when they played Alabama, they had to play pretty perfect football, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. They had to play nearly perfect football to win that football game. They've had to do it pretty much every year prior to this one. They didn't play perfect football in this game, and they found a way to win off toughness, off grit, and off just making the right plays in the right moment. That is what Vanderbilt is right now. It's just a good football team. There's no gimmicks about it. There's no little side roads that they're taking. They are as good as anyone in this conference, and they are absolutely someone that can go into the SEC championship and get a big-time win. They're a super dangerous team. Now, Diego Pavia was far from perfect in this football game, and a lot of people are clowning him for saying, I should be the Heisman Trophy winner after the game. I tend to disagree with him. All that being said, that confidence is a huge reason why they won this football game, because no matter the score, no matter the circumstance, no matter how many yards they have on the day, no matter how well that offense is playing, they walk out on the field, they see number 2, and they say, we have a shot to make this happen. That is a huge difference maker for a team that, just on paper, is not as talented as a lot of the teams they're going to play, even going forward with Tennessee and Texas still coming up. They're not as talented as Texas. They have a quarterback that gives them the ultimate amount of confidence, and they execute at a ridiculously high level. They deserve all the respect in the world for that. On the Missouri side, Beau Pribula did go down in this game. I don't know how much it impacts the outcome of this game, but Matt Zollers played really good football. Was really impressed with what he did on the road in a very, very tough spot. He played really good. I'm not confident he can beat A&M this upcoming weekend, or again after a bye. Can't quite get that straight in my head right now, but at the end of the day, I'm not sure he can win that A&M game. It doesn't sound like Beau Pribula is going to be back until a possible CFP berth, so we'll figure that out as it kind of unfolds. But at the end of the day, you gotta still feel okay if you're a Missouri fan. I get this season looked really good, and it looked like everything was moving in the right direction. Ahmad Hardy was playing great football. You have the 2 edge rushers in Zion Young and Damon Wilson playing elite, and they played elite again on Saturday. And you have a shot in every game that you're going to play going forward, mainly because of those 2 guys. But at the end of the day, this is still a program heading in the right direction. You are going to have to fight off your head coach from a number of other programs. So that is going to be the thing to watch around Missouri. Still very much alive. There's no doubt about that. But I do want to point out something around this Missouri football team. If you can keep Ahmad Hardy under 5 yards per carry, which sounds crazy because that is a really, really good yards per carry, even if you go 4.5, very productive day, you can beat this football team. And it's just the plain simple fact that it doesn't mean he won't be productive. He is going to be productive. He is as good as you will find in the entire country when it comes to running backs. He won't break the game if you keep him under 5 yards per carry. If you keep him from those 15, 20, 25-yard chucks, I believe his longest run in this game was 17 yards. So you had the ability to at least keep a cap on what Ahmad Hardy could do, and that keeps you in football games. When you're playing Missouri, that's something that A&M is going to try to do with Cassius Howell and all the beasts they have up front. That is something to watch going forward. If Ahmad Hardy gets 20 carries in a game and he doesn't get over, let's say, 120, 125, you're probably in pretty good shape against this Missouri team, not because they're bad passing the football, but because now you have a younger quarterback and you had a guy in Beau Pribula that just fell a little bit short when that was fully put on his shoulders. But that being said, the Vanderbilt defense deserves all the respect in the world. It's far from a perfect group, but they play really fast, really physical, and they don't make a ton of mistakes. They don't allow those huge plays down the field that totally change the complexion of a game because they know their offense is a little bit grind you out. So you can't necessarily go down 14 points and then ask your offense to find your way back into the game. You got to be able to control, and the best way to do that is to avoid those game-changing plays. Now they move forward, and there is a path to 11-1 and 2 in Atlanta. They go to Texas this upcoming weekend, possibly without Arch Manning. We'll talk about that here in a second. Auburn, Kentucky, and then at Tennessee to finish it. They can win all of those. They could also lose to Texas and Tennessee and fall short of the CFP and fall short of the SEC championship. It's a very, very good football team. I don't expect them to fall in both those games. I expect them to be in the CFP. A lot is still on the table, and they have to continue to execute. There's been some cracks that have shown over the last couple of weeks. That Texas defense is going to come ready to play, especially after the performance they put on this last weekend. It is going to be a fight the rest of the way, but I love this Vanderbilt team, and there is no reason to believe they will not be in the CFP at the end of the year. For Missouri, you're in it. There's no doubt about that. You do get a bye before A&M, which is massive. It does sound like it's going to be Matt Zollers in that game. Very talented kid. If you can get that kid up to speed, he can do some incredible things in that game. Then you got Mississippi State, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. I think 9-3 would be incredible. I think 8-4 is probably what I expect the rest of the way from this Missouri team. Really like what they're building up there, and as long as Eli Drinkwitz is there for 2026, I have all the confidence in the world there's going to be another CFP contender. You might have just caught the wrong injury at the wrong time in the schedule for it to really come to fruition this year. Really good team, and frankly, with those two edge rushers, maybe they can beat A&M and do something special down the stretch. And then Ole Miss gets a big-time win over Oklahoma, 34-26. They keep doing it. They keep doing the thing whenever you think that this team might take a small step back offensively. They might just strip up just a little bit. And this Oklahoma defense, it's a good group. There's no question about that. Now, maybe not as elite as some were talking about early on in the season, including myself, were talking about early on in the season, but Ole Miss just executed at a ridiculously high level. Trinidad Chambliss goes for 350 yards again. Feels like he does it every single week. Doesn't turn over the ball over again. It feels like he does that every week. A really special kid, and a kid that not many people can do what he is doing. It will somehow be overshadowed with all of the craziness going on and a million different things to talk about in the world of college football. This kid came from D2 and is playing in the SEC week over week and just dominated a Brent Venables defense that is not bad. I can promise you that. Now, might not be downright elite, is plenty good. And I think the special thing about this Ole Miss team compared to last year, I think that's what everyone's trying to figure out, is I don't think this team is as rawly talented as the one last year was for Ole Miss, but I think it's a better team, and we're trying to figure out how that's the case. First of all, Keywan Lacey is as huge of a player as you will possibly find in the country. He has been massive for this team. He had 78 yards in this game. They were a huge 78 yards, and he was a massive player for them. Winston Watkins, a true freshman, just coming alive for 111 yards. Harrison Wallace has gone for 100 yards in the past. Caden Lee, the most experienced and maybe the best NFL prospect among this wide receiver group. Deshaun Stribling, Deuce Alexander, Daquan Wright. There's so many guys to go after. When you look back at last year, it felt like if Trey Harris wasn't going, then this offense wasn't really going in the pass game. Now, they had dudes. It's not to say they didn't have any options outside of him. They go about 6 or 7 deep of guys that you're going to have to be worried about every single week when you game plan for this team. And then you have Lane Kiffin calling plays. It's remarkably hard to stop this group. I don't think any defense is going to be able to fully slow them down. Some will do better than others. Hopefully some will do better than Oklahoma. But at the end of the day, this is one that Oklahoma just really was never in control of because of the offensive efficiency of Ole Miss. But overall, Oklahoma was just kind of over their skis in this game. Felt like the offense never really got going. They found 2 explosives, which were massive to keep them in this game, but as a whole, it was a very disappointing performance from this offense. I think John Mateer continues to be just not 100%. And I don't know if 100% they win this game. I don't know if they win the Texas game 100%. All of that is up in the air and totally nebulous. But the reality is, it doesn't look like the same quarterback we saw early in the season, and I think it's affecting this team's confidence in a big way. And they get a Tennessee defense next week where maybe they can open things up. It is not a good defense. Gave up 34 points, I believe, this weekend to Kentucky. They will have a chance to get back on track and hopefully get a big-time win. But then you got Bama, Missouri, and LSU to close things out. I think Oklahoma's going to fall short of the CFP. I think 8-4 is likely the most likely outcome. We'll see if it goes terribly. We'll see if they get the win over Tennessee and maybe can turn things around. But as of right now, I'm pegging 8-4 for Oklahoma the rest of the way. To me, Ole Miss has kind of punched their ticket. They do have South Carolina this upcoming weekend before the Citadel, which ridiculousness every year. But at the end of the day, we'll leave it there. And then they get Florida and Mississippi State to finish the season. They could collapse. There is a world where they do collapse. It happened last year, not to this aggressiveness, but definitely could happen. I don't think it's going to happen. If they get past South Carolina, I feel very confident in them, especially if they get past Florida. That Mississippi State game could be massive if they drop one of those games. But at the end of the day, Ole Miss is rolling right along. Lane Kiffin coaching elite football, and could be his last couple around there in Ole Miss, so better make them count. But we'll see what happens the rest of the way. Some really, really good games this weekend, and one firing from Brian Kelly. I think a lot of people, I don't know if they expected it to go down this way this year. I think a lot of people saw this year as kind of a do or die around there over at LSU, at least around that program. It didn't work out, and it didn't work out in a hurry. So Brian Kelly's officially out. I think it makes sense for just about everyone involved. And we'll see what LSU does, and that will probably inform what Florida and Penn State and Arkansas and all the other jobs do. And we'll talk about it all a little bit more depth, probably on Thursday, get into all the coaching openings. Maybe another one opens before we talk then. So a lot that will happen. I promise you we'll cover it. But let's take a little bit of a break here. When we come back, we had some upsets, and we had a lot of close calls that we'll talk about right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about, Brian Kelly getting fired to start things off, and then the big games that happened this weekend. A&M rolls LSU, as you can imagine, with Brian Kelly getting fired. Vanderbilt gets a win that they badly needed going down the stretch, and Ole Miss kind of punches their ticket to the CFP. Still some work to do, but look very, very good down the stretch of the season. And now we got to get into some other things. There were some upsets this last weekend, and there were a lot of close calls. We'll start with the weirdest one of the bunch, and the one that could go down as maybe one of the bigger results of the entire year, and we'll talk about that here in a second. Texas wins this one 45-38 over Mississippi State in overtime. I have no idea. I have no idea how this happened. There was Mississippi State going way too fast late in that football game, and that's something I want to talk about here in a second. But Texas was down 17 with less than 10 minutes left. The last 429 times that has happened in the FBS, the team up has won. Somehow Texas made it happen. And frankly, it was a lot of Arch Manning putting this offense on his back. The offensive line did not play all that better. The run game did not get going in this football game. There were a couple of drops, and Arch Manning just kept finding a way. Had a beautiful ball downfield to Ryan Wingo, had a number of incredible throws to the corner of the end zone, and then he goes down in overtime. They force overtime. He goes down, and Matthew Caldwell comes in and just drops a perfect fade ball to Emmett Mosley, gives the win to Texas, and mounts the craziest comeback that I've seen in quite some time. It is absolutely ridiculous what they were capable of doing, and it was a totally different player in Arch Manning in the second half. I believe went 17 for 27, over 220 yards, 2 touchdowns in the second half. Really incredible performance from a kid that really needed it at that very moment, both for him and that defense badly needed it. This is by far the worst defensive performance that Texas had really in a long time. In the last couple of years, I think Jeff Lebby does an incredible job against this defense because he makes them not be able to sub, move very quickly in. To be totally fair, they are coming off a game where they were on the field for 40 minutes of the regulation against Kentucky and then overtime. So the defense was plenty tired. I think that did play a big time role in it, but it is something to watch going forward. How good is this Texas defense? Is it elite like we thought? Or is it just a good group that could get them at least somewhat there, and then the offense has to meet them halfway? But something to watch moving forward. The question is, will Arch Manning be healthy moving forward? Because he is going into concussion protocol. It sounds like that can be done by Saturday. I don't know if it will be. That was a very, very hard hit that he took. Matthew Caldwell would be the starter against Vanderbilt if he couldn't go. that would obviously be a massive blow in a game that Texas has to win. They got to win the rest of the way, and they found a way to get one done in this one. I can't imagine there are a lot of people that feel a whole lot better about Texas moving forward in terms of they're going to win every game the rest of the way and go to the playoff. I don't think anyone felt that way after this game, but they gave themselves the shot to, at the very least. So incredible game from Arch Manning, an incredible game from this Texas offense that badly needed it down the stretch of this game. And then Ryan Niblett does it again. It's a remarkable player that 3 weeks in a row has pretty much won Texas a football game. Now, the Oklahoma game was pretty much sealed and done with by the time that he ran back that kick, but he runs back the kick against Oklahoma. It's the moment the nail was put in the coffin, right? That was the end of that game entirely. Against Kentucky, returns two 40-yard kicks all the way down to the Kentucky 5, the Kentucky 7-yard line, and gives Texas essentially 10 free points. And then in this game, he gets the kick return in a moment where, yes, the offense was moving the ball very well, but they had a minute 47 to go about 60 yards and score a touchdown. There was no guarantee that they were going to be able to do that. Ryan Niblett took care of that. Just incredible. And the defense, there are reasons to worry about it. Did lock in later in that game after the Devon Booth just ridiculous 68-yard catch that he made. Finds a way to get a couple of stops, get the offense the ball back in. Texas gets a win. That's all they needed going into this weekend. They find a way to get it. And now you got to hope that Arch Manning is on the field against Vanderbilt. If he's not, we'll see if they can get it done with Matthew Caldwell. The long and short of it for Texas fans is the season is still alive, and that's all that matters, especially when you're down 38-21 late in that football game. Alabama escaped in South Carolina. You could have called this from a mile away, if I'm being totally honest. This was one of those games. Alabama coming off 4 straight games where they play top 20 opponents. They get massive wins against Georgia, against Tennessee, Vanderbilt, and Missouri. And then they play a South Carolina team that's 3-4, not playing great football. Lenora Sellers a little bit all over the place, but they're still a nasty team. And they're still a team that has 2 of the very best edge rushers you will find in the country in Dylan Stewart and Brian Thomas Jr. They're a team that can do very, very dangerous things, especially at home. And that's kind of what you saw happen. They were put into very, very tough spots. Was Alabama in this game? A couple of mistakes from South Carolina totally changed this game. It was the drop at the beginning of the game from Faison that led to the touchdown for Deshaun Jones, and then it was the Lenora Sellers fumble late. It's just 2 moments. It's 2 moments that are the difference between them winning and losing this football game, and that's kind of what it's felt like for South Carolina this entire year. Not necessarily that all of their games were down to the wire nail-biters, but just feels like if a couple of things went their way this entire season, they'd be in a much better spot. If Lenora Sellers doesn't go down against Vanderbilt, maybe they don't win that Vanderbilt game, but at the very least, they're looking much better moving forward. It's just one of those teams. I talked about it going into the season. There was going to be an SEC team that just got by all of the teams being in this thing, all of the teams wanting to compete for a CFP, all the teams being capable of competing for a CFP. One team was going to have a terrible season. It happened to South Carolina, and that's a tough thing for them. We'll see what happens with Shane Beamer moving forward. I still firmly believe that he is the right head coach for that job. Does he stay at South Carolina? Seems to be relatively up in the air. But at the end of the day, South Carolina got a short end of the stick. They get Ole Miss and A&M on the road the next 2 games. Not going to be great. Maybe you beat Clemson to finish off the year and feel a little bit better about yourself, but a bowl game would be downright incredible at this point for South Carolina. For Alabama, they're not a perfect team by any means. Ty Simpson finds a way to make plays when they have to be made, and that is something that can't be said about a lot of quarterbacks in the country right now. So this is a team that is flawed. There's no doubt about that. I don't think there's a team in the SEC in particular that is not flawed, and really flawed in some respects. But at the end of the day, you find a way to get it done. After a really, really tough stretch of games, you find a way to go into a bye with a win after 2 just masterful drives late in that game. And you get LSU right out of it. We'll see what that LSU team looks like, but at the end of the day, Alabama gets a win when they absolutely needed it. I'm not going to take too much away from Alabama in this one. I think it's just one of those spots where really, really long stretch, and now you got to bye week 2 at the very least. Catch your breath. Oregon wins a really gross one against Wisconsin, both in the score and just the overall conditions in this football game. It was raining pretty much from start to finish. Oregon ran the ball 45 times to 19 passes. it was tough. The injury to Dante Moore threw a little bit of a wrench into things. It sounds like he is going to be more than fine and be back for next week, but Brock Thomas came into the game. Dan Lanning had a weird question after the game of why he went into the game. He's the best option to go into the game. That's just kind of the reality of that. But regardless, Jordan Davison, very talented young freshman running back, had a great day. 107 yards, 2 touchdowns. Noah Whittington went for 97 yards on the ground. Oregon, like Alabama, I think went through a really, really interesting stretch over the last little bit. You lose to Indiana. You play a couple of games that aren't necessarily all that difficult, but are kind of trap spots, are really tough spots on the road where they had to come up with big wins. They were able to do that. And this was a game where it was gross from the jump. You knew you were going to have to run the ball, knew you were going to have to play kind of a field position, possession type game. You were able to do it. I think that's the end-all, be-all. Still feel really, really good about what this Oregon team is going forward. The circumstances just made this one really ugly. As for Wisconsin, I think you're going to join the party here pretty soon in terms of the coaching carousel. I don't know where you stand on the totem pole, so that's something to watch going forward. I don't know what type of hire they can make. I know there's a lot of really good coordinators and G5 guys that they could go after. It's going to be an interesting thing to watch. Maybe Wisconsin is one of these teams that just holds on to Luke Fickell for one more second to allow all these teams to make their hires and get in the 2026 cycle. Something to watch as we go on the rest of the season, but Wisconsin is Wisconsin at this point. At the very least, you got in the end zone this time around. Virginia got so lucky here, and UNC is collectively, I think, 6 inches away from 2 wins the last 2 weeks. They fumble on the goal line against Cal. They fall just short on a 2-point conversion overtime against Virginia. And Virginia escapes with 2 wins over UNC and Washington State by a combined 3 points. I don't know how to feel about Virginia going forward. I guess the best way to put it. You had 3 turnovers from UNC in this game that really ended up doing them in. They outgained Virginia by about 100 yards. So Virginia got a little bit lucky here, and they found a way to keep moving on. They go to Cal this weekend. If they can win that one, they get Wake Forest, Duke, and Virginia Tech to finish things off. They still can find a way to go undefeated, and it could be Virginia against Georgia Tech in the championship for the ACC. It feels like a team that's flirting with disaster, and they're going to a team in Cal that can put up points in a hurry. So that is something to watch. Definitely really, really interesting. This UNC team is getting better. There's no doubt about that, especially on the defensive side of the ball, is starting to play a little bit more of that Bill Belichick defense. I tend to believe that's going to come to an end at the end of the season, but at the end of the day, they're starting to kind of turn a corner, at least play a little bit tougher of matchups. At some point, they have to find a win. I think they get Syracuse this weekend, so hopefully they can get a win there, but just a tough season that got a little bit tougher for the Tar Heels. Houston gets a massive win over Arizona State. I don't know if you can call this an upset per se, but Houston getting this win is everything for them, and they put themselves in a very real contender spot in the Big 12, especially if Connor Wegman is going to shine this brightly every single week. Went for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, 2 on the ground. He's become such a menace with his legs, which I didn't know he had in his bag at A&M. I don't know if that was a Jimbo Fisher thing. I don't know if that was a Connor Wegman thing, but he's found it under Willie Fritz. Tanner Kozio goes for over 100 yards, a guy Wisconsin probably should have on their team, but that's beside the point. Arizona State fell into a hole in this one and just didn't have enough to come back into it. Multiple missed kicks, a fumble, too much to overcome, and it was just one of those games that went wrong pretty much from the get-go for them. It's a really well-coached Willie Fritz team. So when you fall down by 24 points, you're very unlikely to find your way back, especially with a team that can run the ball that effectively. Sam Leavitt leaving the game late obviously does not help that. Now, Jeff Sims did lead a touchdown drive, so got him in position to at least compete for this game, but they fall short, and I think this season is, I don't want to say done because they obviously still have plenty to play for, but I think the Big 12 championship is probably not realistic at this point for Arizona State. They're still going to be a really good team and a fantastic program as long as Dillingham doesn't leave for somewhere, because that's a name you're going to see on a lot of coaching lists. I don't think he's going anywhere, and I think Arizona State will continue to build something really special over there in Tempe, but this is a tough loss. For Houston, it opens a lot of doors. You have West Virginia, UCF, TCU, and Baylor to finish this thing off. You can win out. If they run the table, I think they need Texas Tech to beat BYU because they lost to Texas Tech earlier in the season. But if that does happen, which very well could in the next couple of weeks, you could have a Houston against Texas Tech title game. That would be incredible. I can promise you that. Now, a lot of this has to be worked out, and a lot of this will be worked out in the craziness that is the Big 12, but this Houston team just been very, very quietly putting together wins. Well, now they're 7-1, and they're playing really good football and could firmly be in the CFP conversation down the stretch with just one huge game in Arlington to decide it all. This was one of the grossest games that has ever been played. It was SMU losing to Wake Forest 13-12. Neither of these teams had any interest in winning this football game. The finish of the first half in this football game went punt from SMU that was muffed by Wake Forest. So SMU gets the ball back. They throw an interception. Wake Forest throws an interception. A fumble from SMU. A missed field goal from Wake Forest. Just for fun, they open the second half. INT for Wake Forest, missed field goal from SMU, a couple of punts, and a turnover on downs before a score. There were 8 total turnovers in this football game, and more of them came at the end of the game to finish the game. Wake Forest is on the 6-yard line of SMU. They fumble. SMU gets the ball, can't move it to save their lives. They punt the ball away, and Wake Forest somehow gets a crazy catch and a 50-yard field goal to win it. I don't know. It is the weirdest, grossest game that I have ever laid my eyes on. Neither of these teams wanted to win this football game. Somehow Wake Forest got it done. Now, all respect to Jake Dickert because he's putting together a really, really fun team over there. It is very, very tough to beat that Wake Forest team on a week-to-week basis because they play so hard. And they do some really incredible things on defense. A lot of respect to Jake Dickert for what he's built over there. They get Florida State, Virginia, UNC, and Duke the rest of the way. They can make some noise. I don't think they're going to make the ACC championship or anything special, but they absolutely are a team that and a program that seems to be moving in the right direction. SMU gets Miami next weekend, then they get Boston College, Louisville, and Cal to finish it off. They're still firmly in it. They got to beat Miami this weekend, and I don't really see them doing that. So I think SMU's pretty firmly out of it. Frankly, watching that game, I'm kind of glad they're out of it. With all due respect to Rhett Lashley and the boys over there, that was rough, and you very much deserve to lose that game. Now, you could argue Wake Forest deserved to lose it as well, but at the end of the day, just a weird weekend. One where the Texas game, people were writing obituaries for the Texas team, and frankly, it was totally warranted for this Texas team at that moment when they're down 31-14, and then they get one more score, and then they're down 38-21, and they find a way to come back. I don't know how they did it, but they found a way. Alabama found a way, and a couple of big-time upsets that really does change, especially the Big 12. That Houston win is massive down the stretch, and we'll talk about it, I'm sure, going down the stretch of the season. But let's take a break, and then a little bit of a whip around. Indiana just drags UCLA. Georgia Tech does the same to Syracuse. BYU gets a huge win over Iowa State. Memphis, massive win over South Florida, and a couple other things right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all the upsets / really close calls. There were a whole lot of close calls this past weekend. Nothing absolutely catastrophic happened, but probably means something's going to happen this upcoming weekend. But let's go ahead and wrap this thing up. Let's get into a little bit of a whip around of just all the games we didn't have a chance to get to early on. Let's start with Indiana just disposing of UCLA, might be the nicest way to put it, frankly. It was really cool to think about for a second, but this Indiana team is just a little bit different. And I think they've proven that throughout the rest of this season. Aiden Fisher takes the pick six back to start the game, essentially, and it was all Indiana from there. We even got to see Fernando's little brother, so that was very, very cool to see him out there. Very talented quarterback as well in his own right. But the rest of the way, Indiana does have at Maryland. Little sketchy, definitely something to watch there. At Penn State, I don't think is going to be sketchy. Wisconsin and then at Purdue, they should be 4-0. They should be 12-0 going into that possibly Ohio State game. I assume Ohio State in the Big 12 championship in Indianapolis. It's a really good football team, and they know exactly who they are. They know exactly how they want to attack every single week. They have a three-headed monster at running back that's downright elite. Elijah Surratt is at worst a top 5 wide receiver in the country, probably a top 3. Fernando Mendoza playing as good of football as you're going to find in the country. And Aiden Fisher, if you can find me a better linebacker in the country, please show me. Now, Arvell Reese, I think, is fighting him pretty good, and that Buckus Award race is going to be downright special, but Aiden Fisher is doing plenty, at least in my mind, to lock that up as of right now. But an incredible game from Indiana. It was cool to think about UCLA pulling off the insane, but probably was never going to happen here. Georgia Tech gets a dominating win over Syracuse 41-16. Never really a doubt in this football game. There were small moments early on where Georgia Tech didn't look fully there, but they found a way to get on. They marched to a big-time win, and Haynes King continues to put up just absurd numbers. 395 total yards, 5 touchdowns, just total domination from this guy. And I'm not saying he should be the Heisman winner. I'm hard-pressed to find a quarterback that is more important to his football team than Haynes King. Incredible football player, both from a mental perspective and a leadership perspective, but what he does on the field is just downright incredible. But the Georgia Tech team is very real. Now, we can argue whether or not they're number 7 in the country or number 10 or whatever. We can argue about that all day. But at the end of the day, NC State this upcoming weekend, a tough team with a really talented quarterback in C.J. Bailey. They get Boston College before a Pitt team that playing really good football with Mason Heinscheld, so something to watch there. And then obviously Georgia at the end of the season. Very real chance they're 11-0 going into that Georgia game. Very real chance they could be ranked above Georgia. If Georgia were to drop one of these games down the stretch, huge moment for Tech. They could lock up an ACC title berth, and then they're 60 minutes away from a CFP berth. With the way the ACC is looking, I have no reason to believe Tech can't beat just about anyone. If they find their way to Charlotte, a huge one against NC State this upcoming weekend, but they keep rolling on, and if Haynes King's playing at this level, probably going to be the team you see in Charlotte, along with maybe Miami. Miami gets a big win, 42-7 over Stanford here. They started slow in the first half, and I think a lot of people weren't paying attention, so it doesn't hurt them too much, but at the end of the day, they got to find a way to put together a full 60 minutes. It's something that I haven't seen Miami do really all year. Even in the games where they get those big wins, they do kind of fall short in one of the halves, or at least a quarter and a half during those games. Something to watch as you move forward. They get SMU, obviously, in the next week. We'll see what happens in that game. But Carson Beck got back to playing clean football, which is the most important thing for him. Mark Fletcher had probably his best day as a Miami Hurricane. And now you got SMU this weekend, Syracuse, NC State, Virginia Tech, and Pitt the rest of the way. You do not get any buys in between that. So something to watch where maybe you get to a NC State game or a Pitt game down the road where they've played a lot. They've played, I believe, 7 games straight by the time they get to that Pitt game. Could be tough. Now, I tend to believe that they will win out, but there's still a lot on the table for this team, and they could win out and miss the ACC championship. So a lot to watch with this team. They are still watching a Virginia or a Georgia Tech or Louisville to see what they do the rest of the way. I think they're going to be okay. I think this is still a playoff team, but they might need a little bit of help to get there. BYU gets a 41-27 win over Iowa State, and it's such a weird game because I'll be totally honest. I was watching this game kind of on a side TV as everything else was going on, and they were down 24-10. And I was kind of like, okay, it makes sense. BYU just came off an emotional win. Totally makes sense. They came out a little bit flat in this one. We'll move forward. They still have a great shot at the Big 12 championship. And then they just scored everything the rest of the way. They outscored them 31-3 the rest of the way. Bear Bachmeier puts on an absolute show. His best passing performance of his career by far. Parker Kingston makes big play after big play every single week. And they have a havoc-creating defense. It's not an elite defense necessarily, but it is one that's going to get after the quarterback, that's going to cause problems on the back end and force a couple of turnovers. It's a really good group. And it's one of the better coaches in the country, Kalani Sitake, that doesn't get nearly the respect. I'm not going to get into the whole he's definitely a top 10 or a top 5 or a top 7 coach because I think it's a very fluid thing. But that guy has his guys ready every single week, and it's an incredible thing to watch. Now they get Texas Tech. After a bye week, they get a huge game against Texas Tech. They could knock Texas Tech out of the Big 12 championship. They could put their own championship hopes on, let's say, life support. Still very much alive, but a lot of things that might have to happen to get them in. And then they still have Cincinnati. So they are far from done. This is a very good BYU team. They've answered a lot of questions that I've had for a very long time around them. I will say I was a little bit of a doubter. I no longer am. But at the end of the day, they got a couple of big-time games coming up. They win that Texas Tech game. It is your new favorite in the Big 12 without a question and pretty firmly in the CFP moving forward. Texas Tech got back on track, and they picked the perfect team to do it against because everyone gets back on track against Oklahoma State. We can talk about a lot of things in this game. the reality is we got to talk about the quarterback situation from Texas Tech. Mitch Griffiths came in this game, a transfer over from Wake Forest, has played a lot of football, very talented, very smart guy, so he can win you football games. I don't know if he can do it against BYU. Will Hammond is out for the year with an ACL tear. Baron Morton's status is going to be massive for that football game. They got to watch that very, very closely. They got to worry about Kansas State first. Kansas State's right in between those two, and suddenly they're playing good football. So this is going to get interesting over the next couple of weeks for Texas Tech. I think Mitch Griffiths can get them the win over Kansas State. I'm not sure he can do it against BYU. So this is something to watch as we move forward. They get a very comfortable win over an Oklahoma State team that if he didn't get a comfortable win, I'd be very nervous about. But this quarterback situation is getting a little bit sketchy, and this weekend alone against Kansas State, it could all go down in flames if they are not careful. Memphis maybe got the win of the weekend overall with a massive win over South Florida. There's a question here, and I've talked about it a lot on here, that you're going to want to watch the American race. The American Conference is probably where you're going to get the playoff from. Here's the problem. If they all beat each other up, I don't know if that's the case, and that's kind of what's happening. South Florida beat North Texas a couple of weeks ago. Now they lose to Memphis after Memphis lost to UAB. I don't know. This one could get really, really sketchy where you have two two-loss teams and then you have an undefeated team over in the Mountain West. And we'll talk about who I'm talking about here in a second. But at the end of the day, this is a huge win for Memphis. It keeps them firmly in the mix in the American moving forward. Obviously, if one of these teams makes it to the American Championship 11-1, they will end up being in if they end up winning that game. There's no doubt about that. But a lot of big-time hurdles going forward. Both these teams have to play Navy moving forward. Memphis gets Tulane. It's not going to be easy, but huge props to Brendan Lewis for coming back, got injured against UAB, found a way to play in this game, played really, really good football. Over 300 yards and got Memphis a win they badly needed. Now you got to hold off the cannibalization of this conference because it's going to get crazy in that conference and could open the door for another group of 5 team to steal that spot. Washington gets kind of a dominating win over Illinois here, 42-25. This is one of those teams that I think a lot of people just, I don't want to say wrote off, but did kind of sweep aside when they lose to Ohio State at home. A lot of people are going to lose to Ohio State. Maybe everyone's going to lose to Ohio State this year. And then they lose to a Michigan team on the road where the offense just didn't really show up all that well. And the offensive line really struggled. This is a really, really fun team. And Damon Williams is playing as high-level football as you will find in the entire country. 4 touchdowns in this game, I believe over 400 passing. And Luke Altmaier just made one too many mistakes. Had a couple of INTs in this game, had very little run game to help him out, to be totally fair. But Washington, you keep moving on and you stay alive. And frankly, you get Wisconsin after a bye, then you get Purdue, UCLA, and it's Oregon. There's a real reality where they're playing Oregon for a spot to make the CFP, and Oregon could be playing for a spot with their lives. You know, you never know what happens in that USC game for Oregon moving forward. Obviously, I tend to believe Oregon's going to be in a good spot, but it could be a 10-1 Oregon team against a 9-2 Washington team, with Washington with a chance to punch their ticket to the CFP. So a massive, massive win for them, one they absolutely needed, and we'll see what happens the rest of the way. I still think this is a team that is very much alive for that last CFP spot from the Big Ten. And then Michigan, the other team that's very much alive for that spot, gets a big-time win, 31-20 over Michigan State. Far from perfect in this game, but they found a way. They got back to running the football. Bryce Underwood was a little bit all over the place throwing the football in this game, but at the end of the day, it's the same scenario. You come down to the last game of the season with your rival in front of you with a very good chance that you could punch a ticket to the CFP, and you would have the advantage over Washington with that big-time win. So you get Purdue, Northwestern, Maryland, and then you get Ohio State. And if you can get Justice Haynes rolling the way he did in this game against Ohio State, then you're a dangerous team. I think you're still relatively questionable in my eyes as Michigan, but you got 60 minutes at the end of the year that could put everything up in the air. A lot on the table the rest of the way for the Michigan Wolverines. The Big Ten is not going to make a lot of sense. It is very, very confusing. I think we know that those 3 teams up top are very likely to make the CFP. I think that 4th team is very nebulous. It could be no one. It could just be 3 Big 12 teams. I think we could have 3 10-2 teams at the end of this thing right under those elite teams, and you just have to figure out which one's the best. It is going to be really weird down the stretch of this thing, and we'll give some love to Iowa on Tuesday or Thursday. Whenever we do my top 25, the fact that they're not in the AP top 25 is crazy. The Hawkeyes, absolutely, still in this thing, and we'll talk about them more as the season goes on. But finally, let's just get into some group of six, scoreboards. San Diego State gets a big-time win, 23-0 over Fresno State. That is the team that I'm talking about. If the American cannibalizes itself, and really looks like it's going to right now, that is the team that can separate themselves in the Mountain West. That defense is disgusting against under Sean Lewis. The offense is finding their way with Jaden Denningal as the quarterback. Really, really fun team over there in San Diego. Then Boise State, still a team that can make a run here, 124-3 over Nevada. Navy stays in the fight in the American, 42-32 over Florida Atlantic. North Texas gets a dominating win, 54-20 over Charlotte. And then Temple, doing some really fun stuff under Casey Keeler in year one, gets a really dramatic win, 38-37 over Tulsa. But really crazy stuff going on in the group of six. It looked like American. It was just going to be the American Conference race was all you're going to have to watch. Sounds like that might get a little bit messy, and then you got to watch every race. So we'll keep you updated as it unfolds. It's going to be a very crazy time around here the next couple of weeks, both on and off the field. We will cover it all. I absolutely promise you that. It is going to get very, very weird over the next little bit. I think there will be more coach firings. I don't know how it's all going to work out. I know that LSU is at the top, and then everyone works from there. I don't know how quickly that happens. I don't know who's hired. I don't know. There's going to be weird hires. I can tell you that right now, and we will jump into it all as the week goes on. We'll be back tomorrow. We're going to talk about all the big-time games coming up in Week 10. Kind of a weird week, not necessarily a marquee spotlight game. Plenty of massive ones that we will talk about on tomorrow. We'll talk about that. And then on Thursday, we'll get into coaching carousel stuff. We'll talk about the CFP and where everyone stands. We'll get into all the craziness as it unfolds because it's going to get a whole lot crazier. But thank you so much for tuning in to just another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. Please do like, subscribe, comment. It means the absolute world to me. Helps me out a ton. But thank you so much for tuning in, and we will be back tomorrow to break down a massive Week 10 slate on deck.